Alright, I'm back with part 2 of my Purge series thought word vomit. So if you haven't seen my part 1, I would probably watch that first. That's got my quick thoughts and general things like that at the top of this video. In this video, in the top of that video. In this video, I'm just going to be reading through my notes on Season 2. I talked about my notes for Season 1 in the previous video. So I'm just going to get right into it. I'm assuming if you're watching this that you've already watched part 1. First thing that I wrote, I mentioned in the other video, is planning a murder a crime? Is it conspiracy to commit murder if the actual murder is legal? Right? Because conspiracy to commit murder is a crime in the real world, or some version of that. But if the murder isn't technically a murder because it's not illegal, so it's not legally defined as murder, is the conspiracy still illegal? I want answers to these things. It drives my brain crazy trying to figure that out. So the NFFA has these organizations or these officers that are constantly monitoring surveillance. So this kind of goes back to what I mentioned in part 1 about why do people stop at the sirens? Why wouldn't they just keep going? And it's because there are cameras everywhere that people are watching and observing and recording. And it could be security cameras, ATMs, cell phone cameras, right? Drones that they fly around to monitor people. And I don't think it was ever mentioned in any of the prior installments. So that was one of my big questions throughout the whole franchise was, would people really stop at the sirens? And if they know that they're being monitored, then I buy that more. And there are some characters that know, but they're former police officers. So it's like, okay, so they probably would know. So I'm like, does the average person know that they are being watched? And there's kind of a line of thinking related to that in the film called The First Purge, which is the 4th movie. That's a prequel showing the first Purge, and people wear masks. And they're like, why are they wearing masks if it's not illegal? And it's this idea of they know they're being watched. But that was for a localized experiment. So I think it was more widely known because the NFFA was broadcasting videos from the night to the public. So I think it was publicly known by participants, and a lot of them were like wearing contacts, like video recording contacts to take the footage. But they also had drones and stuff. So it was publicly known that there was surveillance in that one. But I don't think it's ever made clear once it was made nationwide and brought into law, if people know that they're being observed. And that is something that I feel like a straight answer wouldn't break the world. Because it would solve this other problem of why are people stopping at the sirens? Oh, because they know that they're being watched. And I guess maybe it's a thing that after a few years of the Purge, I guess probably everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody whose uncle got caught, and I guess it would spread. So maybe it's not as big of a deal as I'm making it. I wrote, none of the projects have really addressed fallout from friends or neighbors after a purge, other than talking about planning for the next purge. So at the time that I wrote this down in the season, that's just one of the things where I'm like, if you go try to kill your neighbor on Purge night and you fail, then like during the year, are you guys still pretending that you're cool with each other? Right? Like, how does that work? I would have liked to have seen that. And this TV show, I didn't realize it at the time, it kind of plays into that idea, and it kind of answers that question, at least in one example. And I mentioned it I think I mentioned it in my part 1, but season 2 mostly takes place between purges. So we get to see the off season. And at one point I just wrote down that this should have been called the Purge off season, because that's really what it is. But I'd be interested in seeing more examples of that, like spouses, right? Like if your spouse tries to kill you on the Purge and fails, how are different people going to react to that? Are you going to be scared of them during the year? Or are you going to assume that you're safe at least until the next purge, right? I would like to see more stuff focusing on that. At one point, a character says, babies make the purge harder, which makes sense because that's another thing you have to protect. And if you're trying to hide, if you don't have a great security system and you rely on hiding in places, babies will cry, even without hearing gunshots and explosions, but especially with that. And it kind of makes me wonder if there's a decrease in birth rate after the purge has been enacted. I don't think that's been mentioned in any of the installments, but that is kind of an interesting, because you know, kind of if you read between the lines, the purge is really a form of population control where the rich can take out the poor. But if there's also fewer people being born, I guess in the poorer demographics, rich people would still be able to afford protection or get out of the country. Yeah, it's just interesting. It's interesting. I would be curious to know if the birth rates actually go down. But then on the flip side, you're going to have a lot of, trying to keep this family friendly, a lot of activity, a lot of conceptions on Purge night. So would that counterbalance it? Would a lot of those get aborted? Like, I'd be interested in seeing the fictional birth statistics in the world of the Purge year by year. I don't think that's something we're ever going to see details on. But that one little comment by that character just opened up this whole other... That's why I like these movies. It's not the violence or anything like it's the thoughts that I try to figure out like how that would work. It's thought provoking. Moving on. We've got some frat games, some hazing activities at school fraternities where they make kids go out and do different things or take pictures of different things during the purge. We've seen before, and it's mentioned again in this show, that certain companies or certain types of technology can disarm security systems. And again, I talked about this in part one. Like, the security systems are not very good. And it's just another straw on the camel's back of, like, why have these installments not come up with a better security system? Alright, anyway, I don't want to get into that whole rant again. We've got somebody talking about making sure that these people are dead, and the idea of people pretending to be dead, either to survive, which we've seen a little bit of, I think, or to like get the drop on somebody. If you act like you're dead and they walk by, then you can get up and get behind them. And so it seems like that's now become enough of a thing that other people, even if they walk past a pile of dead bodies, they're going to shoot all of them again just to make sure that they're dead. And it's just like, at that point, how many rounds of ammunition are you wasting just shooting things that are already dead? I wrote a note that says NFFA, not just white people. So again, when done poorly, like with election year, I think too much of the real world seeps into these movies, and the movies tell you too much, black and white, about these are the bad people and these are the good people. And so in this film, or in this television show, there's a high-ranking member, or I guess, in the grand scheme of things, not a high-ranking member, but a prominent employee of the NFFA that is not Caucasian. And at the beginning of the series, she firmly believes in the NFFA and what they're doing and what they're about. And so I like that in that world, it's not as clear as it seems to be as a viewer, that the movies mostly want to portray the villains, the bad guys, as white people, which I think is more boring. So I like seeing that it's not that cut and dry in the real world, or in the world of the Purge. And I think there's a lot of examples like that in the real world where, don't want to get too down the rabbit hole here, but there are some people that are like, well, you are blank, so how can you possibly support blank? And a lot of people try to make things black and white, and most things aren't black and white. Most things have nuance, most things have context, so I like that that's in here too. That was good to see. At one point, characters go to a suicide bridge and take pictures of people that committed suicide. And I just wrote down, why would someone that's suicidal wait until Purge night to commit suicide? I don't want to get too into that. I don't want to say anything insensitive to people that have attempted that before, or know people that have attempted that before. I know people that have committed suicide, so I like I said, I don't want to say anything insensitive. It just caught me as strange that they would wait till that night. But, I guess if you're living in a society that has a whole holiday built around violence, maybe it makes sense that if you're planning something, that's the night to do it. So I don't know, that was sad to think about. Okay, stealing is legal. What about possession of stolen property? So this goes back to what I was talking about with conspiracy to commit murder. And if it's not murder, if it's legal, I don't think it would be legally defined as murder. So therefore, it wasn't conspiracy to commit murder. It was just planning to do something during the Purge. So I was talking with some friends about this the other day. And how does possession of stolen property work? If I steal a car, someone else has the registration to it, right? So I probably wouldn't be able to keep it after the Purge. But if I tried to, would I be prosecuted for that if it wasn't technically, legally speaking, theft? Because it wasn't illegal. We got into a decently long conversation about stuff like that, and like stealing a house, and how does things that have registration, and if everyone registered their TVs, would the government track down those TVs to get them back? Like I presume they would with cars, but I presume that they wouldn't with TVs. And it's like at a certain point, the workload is too high, and the government is not going to put in enough workforce to rectify that. But yeah, the whole idea of if these things aren't crimes, does planning to do them ahead of time still count as a crime? And does benefiting from it afterwards still count as a crime? And a lot of people rob, right? And in this season, there's a lot of characters that rob banks. So clearly you can keep cash if you steal that, even though that's possession of stolen property, but it's not stolen property if it was stolen during the Purge. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. Alright, what else? Some people know that... Okay, I already talked about that. Does everyone know if they're being observed? There's weird stuff with the robberies. Distinctions between the bank vault and the building of the bank and the property that the bank is on. So there's a character that gets caught where after the sirens have stopped, he's still carrying money out of the bank, and his foot is caught on camera, and it hasn't crossed the threshold of the door to the exit by the time... It's like an NFL instant replay. They keep winding it back and forth and back and forth. But by the time the last siren stopped, his foot had not yet gotten all the way outside. So he was arrested for a crime post-Purge, because he didn't get out in time. If he had gotten out in time, he would have been good. But he hadn't gotten out in time. But they talk about the building. But it was stolen from the vault. And he was out of the vault. And I assume he wasn't off of bank property, and the other people in his crew weren't off of bank property, but that didn't seem to matter. So it's very weird how semantic it gets, even in the world. And at one point later, as he's, for lack of a better term, on trial, he makes the argument that it should be a lesser offense because the crime of using weapons to break into the bank and break into the vault and get the money out of the vault, that was all done during the Purge when it was legal. And the only thing he got caught for was moving money from point A to point B. No weapons were involved, no explosives, nothing like that. No breaking and entering. He was already inside. So he thought he was gonna get tried for a lesser offense, but they found him guilty of the higher offense with no discussion, no jury, no anything like that. So that's another thing that, I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority here and most people just want to see violence and action, but I want to see the nitty gritty of this world and how all these semantics work out. So if I skip ahead a little bit, still talking about this guy, for the higher level offenses, people that are quote unquote found guilty are just held for a year and then executed. And it's like, that's messed up. Like, that's what the police do. They hold them in prison for a year, and then they either execute them, or they sell them, or they auction them off to other people who are going to execute them. Which is depressing. You know, it's like, it's almost like a fundraiser, right? All the people that we catch during the year, the police force then gets paid to transfer them over to be executed. It messed up. It was messed up. One character gets attacked by a contract killer on Purge night, and he has a line of, "I want to know who almost purged me." And again, we get to see the off season, and it consumes his life trying to figure out who this guy was. And then he finds out who the guy was, and he was hired by somebody. Who hired him, right? Who wants me dead? Why do they want me dead? Bubble. And it's just like, how many people deal with that every year? If someone tries to kill you and you survive and you don't know who they were, you know, you gotta wonder. I'm like, was I just gonna be a random victim to them? Are they somebody that I know and I don't remember? Or were they hired by someone? Like, that would mess up so many people. There are purge therapy groups that we see in the show, so I imagine that would be a common topic of discussion at those meetings. This was just one of my thoughts as I was watching. If you kidnap someone famous during the Purge, hold them for a year, and then publicly kill them during the next Purge, are you still on the hook for detaining them in the interim? And when I had my conversations with my friends, they said yes, because you're still committing a crime in the 12 months between. Because even though you kidnapped them during the Purge, if you're still detaining them, if you're still holding them, that's still a crime. But if you then kill them legally, they can't press charges. So can you be convicted for a crime against somebody who's now dead? I don't know how charges work. I assume the state or the county or something could press charges against you, even if it's something that normally would be against an individual. I don't know. Fascinating to think about. We see that there are cleaning services that specialize on cleaning up the day after the Purge, which, yeah, that would be a thing if the Purge was a real thing. We see the city waste departments picking up dead bodies. We've got another quote from a character that's, "We almost died last night and everything is different now." And I can't even remember which character said that, but, you know, like the guy that wants to know who killed him, there's everyone has a different reaction if you know, had a close call. Like, that would just be so common. So I really like seeing the off season, the year between purges, and how different people react to it. And that's not something I think we would see in a movie. So I really liked I appreciated that the show was able to tackle that. The surveillance officers seem like they're extra vigilant right at the end of the sirens, so they're monitoring constantly throughout the night. But they talk about, we might have a lot of finish line screw-ups, to paraphrase what they say, where people are so into it and not paying attention or blah, 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 that they're going to mess up. And we see that with the bank robber. But like they specifically try to find those on top of everything else that they're looking for. They really want to try and catch everyone that does something illegal after the sirens go off. There's a teacher that dies in the show, and one of the antagonists that people don't realize is an antagonist yet, he has the line, "Oh, well, will there be class this week?" And like, I've worked with teachers that have passed away, and or I've had students or other staff members, and usually there's a period where school is canceled and there are school counselors available and things like that. But I'm like, in a world like the Purge, is that just going to be, clearly it's not a definitive thing, right? Like, would schools just like take a week right after the Purge? Because how many students there are either going to have a faculty member that they know died, or a friend, or a family member, and you expect people to go to class the next day? Because the fact that he's asking, do we have class this week, implies that at least colleges, maybe it's different at primary and primary schools, but at least at colleges, it's not built into their school year to have some grief time after that. It's just supposed to be back to normal the next day, which I found very surprising. I feel like that's not how it would work if it really happened. So the guy who got caught, he got caught on camera. Eventually, I don't want to say he turns himself in, but he willingly goes to be arrested. And the police who arrest him are extremely violent. Like, he goes out and he's unarmed, he gets down, and they just beat the crap out of him. And so I wrote down, is this legal? Is this type of police brutality against someone who committed a crime post-Purge, is that legal? Is it a scare tactic that people are like, oh, if I get caught after the sirens, I'm going to get beat, right? But then we find out later that people that are arrested and found guilty are executed. So I'm like, that's enough of a scare tactic, you would think. A beating is nothing compared to being bought by a rich guy so that he can hunt you on his private property. So I'm not sure. I don't know if it's just a product at the time and the director was like, oh, police brutality is a hot issue right now, let's throw it in the show. It felt out of place. So that was kind of weird. Where am I at? Purge insurance. So we've at this point in the franchise, we've seen multiple people talking about Purge insurance, and I just wrote down, would that be required by law? Because like homeowners insurance, I'm pretty sure is required by law, and auto insurance is required, at least in the state that I live in. So it made me, but like something like flood insurance, I don't think, because obviously it's partially based on where you live, but there are different types of insurance that are required and not required. So I was like, would Purge insurance be required by law? Because then we get into companies shooting up their rates on Purge Day like we saw in election year. And it's like, that shouldn't be legal, but if it's not required, then maybe they can get away with things like that. And then people have to make the decision of if it's worth the cost, or if they just want to try surviving with no insurance. we see someone playing a Purge virtual reality game, which is one of those things that when I see it in the show, I'm like, am I a bad person? Because I would absolutely play a Purge reality game where, you know, obviously it's futuristic technology, so you don't have the limitations of what we have on video games. But I'm like, the experience in a virtual form, not a true form, I think I would be curious to try. And so I'm like, am I the bad guy? Am I the bad guy? Is that bad? Is that weird? So maybe I shouldn't have said that, but clearly it's somewhat normal in that world because they've got whole booths set up for them. There's talk in this show, again, kind of like where they talk about weapons of class 4 and below, or class 4 and above, and I'm like, I don't know if those are real classifications or something for the show. And then they talk about government officials of ranking 10, and I don't know if those are real or not. But now we get into fictional amendments. So they talk about Amendment 28, which I was able to find through supplemental material online, is just the law of the Purge, right? The Purge Night as law. That's Amendment 28. But then they also mentioned Amendment 29, and I couldn't find what that was. And I don't remember exactly the context that they say it in, but I think it has something to do with how they prosecute people that commit crimes past the sirens. And then there are different levels of crime, which obviously, you know, we have misdemeanors and felonies and stuff like that, but they have something called Level R. And again, I don't know if that's following or inspired by real-life classifications of laws or just something that they made up for the series. And it's one of those things that I feel like a quick poster or, you know, something would help me understand it better, but not a huge deal. So some of the characters in this season are former police officers, and they talk about how a lot of police officers use the Purge to speed up the process, or if there's someone that has been consistently getting mistrials or getting their cases thrown out, they'll just go out and execute them. And I'm like, yeah, that would probably happen if the Purge was a thing. Okay, so these surveillance officers, one of them is investigating a hunch that she has about someone that she saw get killed on Purge Night, because she's like, I got a feeling like this isn't right, blah, blah, blah. And she's reprimanded for it, saying that, you know, this isn't for personal use. You're not supposed to be working off of hunches, right? If there's nothing illegal there, move on. But then later on, they, like, have them check up on other characters that, like, seem shady. And it's like, well, we didn't see them do anything illegal, but go back and check and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, if that's not a black and white rule, right? If investigating questionable things is allowed, why is it not allowed when it's personal? And I think when I wrote down that question, I didn't realize the full extent of what was going on. But I think it was more of a case of the NFFA didn't want her investigating this particular case, and they just used the excuse that, oh, it's personal, you know, that blah, blah, blah. But I feel like outside of that, it's probably not an actual rule. So not a big issue there. We've got farms, and I couldn't tell how legal this was or not, but we've got farms that allow people to come in and pay to slaughter their animals for them, and it's for people that kill during the Purge and then get addicted to violence and they want to keep killing. And I just, you know, I wrote down, is that legal? That seems like an animal rights violation. And the guy says to pay in cash only, so I'm like, okay, maybe this is a black market thing. But there are also huge signs up outside telling people the rules of how to do it. So I'm like, that seems like that wouldn't be there if it was illegal. So it wasn't shown very much. It confused me. I don't know how that works. Talked about Purge therapy groups already. So the banks in this, we find out by following the bank robbers, pre-Purge, the banks load the majority of their money onto planes, which then take off and are in the air during the entirety of the Purge, and then come back down and land after the Purge has ended. And there's a minimum amount that they have to keep in there safe, but the majority of it they keep out. And I'm just like, why isn't there a business that does that for people? Right? And yes, rich people can get out, and middle-income people that can get out, but I think if the Purge was a real thing in the real world, there would be companies specifically for low-income people to get cheap flights, en masse, massive amounts of people paying a little bit of money is still a decent business model. I think somebody who cares less about profits and more about humanity, but it's like, oh, if I can make a few bucks off of it too, there are people like that out there. It's bizarre to me that hasn't been mentioned as a thing in this world yet. They do it for money, but not for people. It's weird. We see, where am I at? There's a quote, what happens on Purge night stays on Purge night, which is, obviously a Vegas thing. But I'm like, I feel like I've never been to Vegas, but I feel like with Vegas, that's how accurate that is going to depend on, the people that go. And so it's just like, is this a common idea? And then it goes back to like, if your neighbor or your spouse tried to kill you, you cool with them throughout the year? Because like, oh, that was Purge night. I know we're good now, at least until next Purge night, right? So it was, it was a nothing line, but I was like, what is it though? Like what? Anyway, we see something called Remembrance Day, which is another holiday to remember the people that were lost during the Purge. But it says it's 3 months after, I think, and the Purge is March 21st to 22nd. So I'm like, that's almost the 4th of July. It's really close to Independence Day. And I'm like, is that intentional? Because they're, they and all the commencements for the Purges, they say, and blessed be America, a nation reborn. So it's, I don't know if that's intentional or if someone just kind of picked the number and they didn't think about how that actually lines up on the calendar, but I thought that was interesting. And so on Remembrance Day, memorial packages go out to the families of victims. And I'm like, if this whole thing, as it's heavily, heavily implied throughout the franchise, the Purge exists mostly to get rid of the poor so that the government doesn't have to support them. And I'm just like, how much money are they spending on these memorial packages? Maybe it's not much. Maybe the stuff is really cheap to manufacture. And I guess, buying a few million prize boxes is cheaper than consistently, paying for housing and meals and feeding and housing and protecting those that can't necessarily afford to do it themselves. So it probably makes sense, but it was just one of those things that was like, the whole thing is to save money. Yet you're spending money on this? I guess maybe it's just like a PR thing, right? Like, oh, we feel so bad and we're doing this because, you have our condolences and blah, blah. And I guess maybe it just makes them look better to the general public, but I found that interesting. We have characters talking about that there are violence addiction studies going on. And it says there's a lot of violence addiction, especially among the younger generations who grew up with the 28th Amendment. So basically, kids that grew up after the Purge had become a thing, and that's always been a thing as long as they can remember. In particular, after they start, they get addicted to violence. And it's played off as this like huge reveal. They're like, people are getting addicted to violence? What? And they're trying to keep that. And it's just like, that happens in real life. Now, when we don't have a Purge, why are people surprised that that's a thing? And I guess it goes back to the idea of the NFFA and the media reports that crime is down in the off season because of the Purge. So maybe there's this can't think of the word, mindset that violence addiction isn't a thing anymore. And so the fact that it still is and is probably getting worse is more of a reveal. But as someone from the real world watching the world of the Purge, and they're like, people get addicted to violence? It's like, yeah, duh. How do you not? Anyway. Okay. So we see there's one character who does have violence addiction, and he goes out and he keeps murdering people days and weeks and months after the Purge. And the bodies that are isolated and like found later on, the whole thing is covered up by the government, and the media reports, oh, this guy died of a heat stroke, or oh, this person, we don't know what happened, blah, blah. But he realizes that he can keep getting away with murder because his murders aren't being reported. And the police aren't looking for murderers, right? No, there's no search for him. And so he keeps getting more bold with it, more bold with it, more bold with it. At one point, a police officer says they're investigating another murder victim that wasn't one of his, but it's someone else's. And they say the line, I haven't seen a breaking and entering in 6 years, let alone a murder. So, and that seems to just be a regular police officer, not like an inside member of the organization or anything. So it seems like there's some truth to the idea that crime is lower. It's just not as much as the NFFA and the media says. So it's kind of one of those gray things, which I think is good, right? It's not that there's no crime, like it's kind of reported. I think in the world of the Purge, they say that the crime rate is 1%. That's what it's reported as in the world. So it's not nothing. It's not even that low. But it seems like it's also not normal. And like you wouldn't be able to hide everything, right? So it's got to be significantly less. And so it's just like, if it's so significantly less that the average person doesn't realize that people are still being murdered and that these crimes are still happening, and if it's so significantly less that police officers don't think that it's happening anymore, why would you still go through so much effort to hide it when it does happen? Because as long as it's mostly successful, the people that voted for it in the first place are going to keep voting for it. And they're exposed at the end of the show that they've been lying and hiding these things. And the timeline, I haven't totally solved it, but this seems to take place before election year. Because at the end of election year, it's implied that Senator Charlie, can't remember her last name, wins the presidency and outlaws the Purge. And then in the newest Purge film, I believe it's 8 years later? Maybe it's only 4, but it's a new presidential term, and the NFFA is back in power, and they have brought back the Purge. I lost my train of thought. Okay, yeah, so people are upset enough about the little bit that they lied about to vote it out. So it's like, why do that? Why take that risk of lying to the people and potentially getting caught when, if you're upfront, if it's that successful, they're probably going to be okay with it, right? They were probably more upset that you were lying to them than the actual crime that they didn't. I don't know. It's fascinating, as I keep saying. Okay, we've got one character who is talking with his friend about, oh, what are you going to do next year? So we've got one character who is addicted to violence and is continuing to murder outside of the Purge. And then we've got another character who is very pro-Purge, but respects the 12-hour window annually. And he says something along the lines of, making plans for next year keeps me sane. And so the one that is addicted to violence early on, you like see that he's like losing it. And so I thought at that point in the show that he was just going to start focusing on making plans, which we've seen characters in the first season do. He doesn't know. He keeps on murdering. But again, the whole idea of, what happens on the Purge stays on the Purge, and is conspiracy to commit murder still a crime if it's not really a murder because it wasn't illegal? And like some people, they just spend their whole off season planning for the next Purge. Interesting. Again, these are the little things that you don't get to see in the movies, and I find them fascinating. Oh boy, I need to wrap this up. I'm at 40 minutes. Couple more I've got here. So if these cops haven't seen crimes, that implies that crime is actually lower. So I just wrote, what are cops doing with less crime? Are they doing more public service things? And they're less reactive and more proactive? Are they getting more involved with the communities? I wish we could see something positive from that. But drug cartels are clearly still a thing, because there's a police, I want to say, captain that's revealed in this show. It's pretty early on, so not too much of a spoiler, but it's revealed that she's on the payroll for these drug lords, and she like works for them all year, and that's how they keep getting technicalities and keep getting their cases thrown out and stuff like that. So I'm like, so clearly there's still some crime, but just not as much like street level crime. So I'd be interested in seeing, like, what are the police doing? Are there less police? Is there less of a police force? Are they, like I said, are they doing more public service? Are they? I'm curious. Okay, so people in this world think that the creator of the Purge, who we saw in the prequel film, The First Purge, she is not affiliated with the political party. She is interested in the social experiment aspect of it. She finds out, even in the very first one, that the NFFA is manipulating data to the public, and she is assassinated by the NFFA during the Purge, and then they say that they're going to delete the footage, get rid of the footage, erase the footage, whatever, so that it can't be tracked back to them. Even though it was legal, they don't want that to be known. And they talk about her in this show, and most people, it seems like the general consensus is that she committed suicide because she was like upset with what she started. But then there's this counter movement that is spreading the word that she died purging. She was out enjoying it and she just died, and it's just like people are arguing two false accounts and nobody knows the truth that she was actually assassinated. And you would think, with so many anti-purgers at this point in the timeline, that people would be talking about what if she was killed, and they covered it up. But no, we just have two false stories being argued over. At one point, a character says the line, "How can something be good one day and bad the next?" And I'm like, we have that though. And this was another conversation that I had with my friends recently, and it's like, people are less inclined. Let me rephrase that. It seems like law enforcement is more lenient on things like public intoxication on events like St. Patrick's Day, because it's expected, and it's like, okay, I'll let you off with a warning today, but tomorrow, don't let it happen tomorrow, right? And there's a, whether it's accurate or not, I think there's a belief that, people are probably more lenient with giving speeding tickets on Christmas and things like that. And with things like Mardi Gras, there are laws being broken that aren't enforced as heavily as they might otherwise be. And it's just like, we have this. We have this concept of these things are okay this day, but not the next day. And the Purge is just taking that to the extreme. So I guess I would disagree with that character. Okay, at one point we briefly see these radio hosts debating different things about the Purge. And one of the hosts says, "I think we should make the Purge a biannual event." And another one is like, oh, at least, like, you know, why not more? And they like, she doesn't say how much more she thinks it should be, whether it's quarterly or monthly or blah blah blah. But it's like, no, it's good. We should do more of it. And it goes back to the idea of, if it's working, shouldn't we need less of it? And the fact that you're advocating for more of it, isn't that proof that it's not working? We're not getting that release out because you want to have more opportunities to release, which means it's not released. It's still there. But they kind of dropped that pretty quickly. It was kind of weird. I thought that was going to be a big element moving forward, that radio show, but it was dropped pretty quickly. This is just a meta thing as I'm watching it. So this show takes place over the course of a year, from one purge to the next purge. Everybody looks exactly the same, the entire show. And obviously, you know, you're not going to, like, age them up or whatever. But, like, haircuts are all exactly the same. Facial hair is all exactly the same. No one changes appearance at all, except for one character shaves his head. Or doesn't shave it, but he cuts it close, like mine. In the very last episode, as he's getting ready for Purge Night. But, like, one of the characters is wanted. And eventually gets a bounty put up on her head. And she's got a pretty distinctive haircut. And a pretty fancy haircut. And it's like, she's not going out to the hair salon to keep getting that cut. You know, I cut my own hair, you can probably tell. I can do that when I'm on the run and I'm in hiding. But to have this, you know, fancy haircut that A, is going to make you an easier spot when you're trying to remain hidden. And B, you're going to have to go get that up. So it's just one of those things where you gotta accept that it's a fictional show and they filmed it all at once, but it's just like, you'd think that the hair and makeup department would have said something like, guys, we need to make them look different. And a lot of the time jumps are not that long, a couple weeks or a month, but there's a gap of like 3 or 4 months. So like, you'd think at least there, they'd be like, okay, let's change up the looks of these characters now. It's been a quarter of a year. Nope. Exactly the same for every character. It's not like this guy didn't change his haircut. Like, every character looks exactly the same. It's not enough for me to dislike the show, but if I didn't like the show as much, that would be a bigger complaint. I'd be like, come on, guys, get it together. What are you doing? I guess that keeps it cheaper, right? Okay, we do get confirmed that hospitals are off limits during the Purge. There's this kids entertainment show where they do an episode where they're like teaching kids about the Purge, and yeah, your parents might go out and kill somebody, but it's their right to do it. And it's like, well, what happens if my parents get killed? And it's like, super messed up. And I'm like, I guess, yeah, that'd have to be a thing if this was the real, you know, if the Purge was real, because parents oftentimes don't want to talk to their kids about the harder subjects, so that's why we have so many TV shows that do that job for them. And it made me uncomfortable. Luckily, it wasn't focused on very long, but it made me uncomfortable. But the host of the show says it's for adults only. And so I looked it up in supplemental material online, and it seems, I don't think they've ever said it in any of the filmed properties, but it seems like the Purge is only accessible to people 18 years and older. But then I'm just like, so what happens if a minor purges? Right? Because things that are still illegal during the Purge, people can be prosecuted for, like having weapons that are not class 4 or below. But are they just going to go to juvie? Are they going to be tried as an adult? Is it going to depend on the kid? Is it going to depend on what they do? So that would be a terrifying new film, right? The Purge, the teenage years, or The Purge, the next generation, and it all focuses on, you know, preteens and teenagers trying to impress their friends. That would be horrible to watch. Please don't give us that. And then very briefly, we see a bus that's labeled Purge Night Tours. So it seems like there are services that will just drive people around to watch all the horrible things that are happening during the Purge. But still no businesses to get low-income families up in planes for 12 hours. That's all I've got. This video is very long. Have you seen The Purge? Have you watched the TV shows? Do you have thoughts about the questions and the arguments that I've brought up? Let me know what you think. That's all I've got. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.